I guess I should have seen it coming when she stopped kissing me goodnight. It was subtle at first, just a missed moment here, a turn back there. I chalked it up to stress. Work, family life. We were both tired, and that's normal, right? People go through dry spells. You don't panic at the first sign of silence. You hold on. You wait. But it didn't get better. It got colder. One night, I reached out to touch her, just laid my hand on her arm, and she flinched. Not a dramatic pull away, not a slap or a scream. Just this quiet recoil, like her skin forgot what mine ever felt like. And then she said it. Can you not? That was it. Can you not? 3 words that turned the warmth of our bedroom into an icebox. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just pulled my hand back and said I was sorry, even though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. Maybe for not being the man she once wanted. Maybe for still wanting her when she clearly didn't want me. I remember sitting on the couch later that night, trying to figure out when the air between us turned stale. I had loved her deeply, still did, in some echoing way. But love without touch. That's like a song with no sound. It exists, sure, but what's the point? A few weeks later, her best friend, Marnie, dropped by. Unannounced, like she used to back in the early days, before everything started to fall apart. I always liked Marnie. She was the kind of person who saw you even when you weren't looking to be seen. Sharp, intuitive, funny in that quiet, knowing way. She'd always been around. At birthdays, barbecues, weekend brunches. Never intrusive. Just there. That night, she showed up with a bottle of wine and a lopsided smile, saying, "You look like you could use a drink." I didn't argue. We sat on the porch, that low southern breeze curling through the silence. The wine poured easy. The conversation did too. We talked about music, the old road trip we took to Nashville that summer, how different things felt back then, how alive we used to feel. And somewhere between the second glass and the third, she leaned over, touched my hand, and said, "You don't deserve to be invisible." It caught me off guard. Not just the words, but the look in her eyes when she said them. There was no pity there. No condescension. Just truth. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. But I didn't pull my hand away, either. She must have taken that as a sign, because her fingers slid gently across mine. It wasn't some desperate grab or seductive move. It was a moment of connection. And then she whispered, "I always wanted to." That's when the world spun, just a little. My first instinct was guilt. Sharp and immediate. Because this wasn't how things were supposed to go. This wasn't part of the script. I was a married man. Even if my wife barely looked at me anymore. Even if she hadn't touched me in months. Even if I'd become a ghost in my own home. But Marnie didn't lean in further. She didn't push. She just sat there, her hand still resting on mine, waiting for me to speak. I didn't. I couldn't. My mind was a war zone. Part of me wanted to pull away. The other part? It felt something it hadn't felt in a long time. Seen. Wanted. Alive. Still, I stood up. "I can't," I told her, and my voice cracked. Not because I didn't want to. God help me, I did. But I still wore the ring, even if it meant nothing now. She nodded, slow and understanding. "I get it," she said. "But that doesn't mean you don't deserve more." Then she left, without another word. That night, I lay next to my wife. Her back to me, like it always was now. And I just stared at the ceiling, heart pounding from a moment that almost was, from a truth I didn't want to admit out loud. I was lonely. Not just alone. Lonely. The kind of lonely that seeps into your bones and makes your own reflection feel like a stranger. And I couldn't shake Marnie's words. You don't deserve to be invisible. But here's the thing about being invisible. It's not just something others do to you. Sometimes, you do it to yourself, slowly, unknowingly, out of fear. Fear of confrontation. Fear of being the bad guy. Fear of letting go. I hadn't confronted my wife. I hadn't asked the questions I needed answers to. I just assumed the silence was safer than the truth. But maybe silence was the slowest kind of death. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen, scrolling her phone, sipping coffee. I cleared my throat, trying to find the courage. "We need to talk," I said. She looked up, barely. "About what?" "About us." She set her mug down, expression unreadable. "Is this about last night?" "Marnie told me she stopped by." I froze. "She said you looked off," she added, eyes narrowing. "Something happened I should know about?" Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't curious, either. It was calculated. I swallowed. She didn't do anything wrong. She laughed, a dry, empty sound. "I didn't ask if she did. But if you're waiting for me to care, don't." I told you months ago. I can't keep pretending we're something we're not. There it was. The confession, in the form of indifference. So that's it. I asked quietly. She shrugged. What did you expect, honestly? We don't work. We haven't in a long time. And you never said a word, I whispered. You just shut down. Stopped touching me. Stopped seeing me. She met my eyes finally, because I didn't want to fight anymore. And just like that, it hit me. She hadn't cheated on me in the traditional sense. Not that I knew of. But she'd betrayed something deeper. A promise to care, to connect, to show up. She'd abandoned the emotional core of our marriage and left me to rot in the empty shell. And I let her. That night, I packed a small bag. Not out of anger. Not as punishment. But because staying any longer would have been betrayal too, of myself. I left her a note. Simple. Direct. I loved you. Even when you stopped loving me. But I can't be a ghost in my own life. I need to find the man I used to be. And maybe learn to forgive the version of me who stayed too long. Then I walked out into the night. And I didn't look back. The first night alone was the hardest. I checked into a small inn on the edge of town. Nothing fancy. Just clean sheets, a window that creaked when it opened, and enough silence to drown in. I sat on the edge of the bed with my bag still zipped beside me, staring at the wall like it had answers. The truth is, I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't leaving for someone else. I wasn't chasing Marnie or some fantasy of what could have been. I was leaving because staying meant losing myself piece by piece, year by year, until there was nothing left but a man in a marriage that had long since stopped being one. For the first time in years, I woke up without her in the room, and the air felt real. Heavy, but real. That morning, Marnie called. I didn't expect it. I hadn't planned for it. But her name lit up my phone like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Hey, I said, voice still thick from sleep. Are you okay? She asked, skipping any pretense. Just 3 words, but they landed with the kind of weight that tells you someone actually means it. I left, I said. A pause. You what? I packed a bag and walked out last night. She didn't stop me. Marnie was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, I'm sorry. For what that cost you? No, I replied. I'm sorry I waited this long. She didn't say anything else for a while, and neither did I. We just let the silence breathe. It wasn't uncomfortable, just honest. Do you want company? She asked gently. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to see her, but because I didn't want her to be a rebound. A replacement. That's not what she deserved. Marnie, I said slowly, I don't know who I am right now. I'm still sorting through the pieces. I know, she said. I'm not asking for anything. Just letting you know I'm here. And then she hung up. No pressure. No expectation. Just presence. Over the next few weeks, I started to put things in order, emotionally, practically. I got my own place. Tiny but mine. I went to therapy. That was new. Vulnerable in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be before. And for the first time, I stopped trying to make sense of why she stopped loving me and started trying to understand why I accepted it. One of the hardest things to admit is that you were complicit in your own unhappiness. I had let the distance grow. I didn't fight for connection when the disconnection began. I swallowed every moment of rejection with a smile and told myself I was just being patient. But patience without boundaries isn't love. It's self-erasure. One night, maybe a month after I left, I ran into Marnie again. Pure coincidence, or maybe not. I had ducked into a small bookstore on 8th Street just to get out of the rain. She was already inside, flipping through a poetry collection, hair tucked behind her ears, eyes half lost in the words. When she looked up and saw me, she didn't jump or gasp. She just smiled. Soft. Familiar. Like I wasn't some broken thing she had to tiptoe around. Hey, she said. Hey. Still raining out. I nodded. Figured I'd hide here for a while. Good place to get lost, she said, patting the cover of her book. Want some coffee? I followed her to the cafe in the back of the store. We didn't talk about my ex. Not that night. We talked about music, art, travel, things that made us feel human again. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even flirty. It was warm, simple, and I needed that. Before we parted ways, she handed me the book she'd been reading. The Sun and Her Flowers. I read off the cover. There's a poem in there about growing in the dark, she said. Thought of you. I smiled genuinely. Thanks, Marnie. I didn't rush anything between us. Truth is, I wasn't ready. Not then. But we kept crossing paths. Sometimes planned, sometimes not. Sometimes a text late at night. You okay? Sometimes silence for a week or two. She never pressured. She never expected. She just stayed present, even from afar. And I grew. Month by month, I learned how to sit with my pain without letting it consume me. I stopped blaming myself for everything that went wrong. And I also stopped blaming her. My ex, I mean. She had her own wounds. Her own history. Maybe we were never meant to last. Maybe we were only meant to learn. I signed the divorce papers quietly one afternoon. No lawyers. No drama. Just closure in ink. When I left the courthouse, I didn't feel anger or grief. I felt free. It wasn't until nearly 6 months later that I asked Marnie to dinner. A real one. Not porch wine or bookstore coffee. An honest-to-God date. She looked surprised when I said it. Are you sure? I nodded. I'm not broken anymore. I'm healing. And I want to share that version of me with someone who actually sees it. Dinner was quiet. Easy. Not filled with the anxiety of something new, but the calm of something true. We didn't define anything that night. We didn't need to. What mattered was that we were there. Present. Honest. And when she reached for my hand across the table, it wasn't electricity that I felt. It was warmth. A steady warmth that said, "You're not invisible anymore." Now, months later, our relationship is slow, intentional, and open. We talk about everything. Fears, boundaries, past wounds. We don't pretend it's perfect, but it's real. And that's more than I ever had before. Sometimes, when I lie awake beside her, I think about the man I used to be. The man who stayed too long in a cold marriage, who thought love meant endurance instead of connection. I'm not that man anymore. And sometimes I still hear those words in my head. She said she wouldn't touch me. But now, I remember what came next. Her best friend touched my hand and said, "I always wanted to." Not in lust, not in betrayal, but in care, in hope, in belief that I could be seen again, and that maybe, just maybe, I was still worth loving.